They also write
I would say
We got it.
I didn't like the symbol thing.
no.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Darren Padwell. I'm a professor and chairman here in the Department of Exercise and Sports Science. It's great to see so many people here this afternoon for the 2015 Carl Blyth Lecture in Exercise and Sports Science. We're going to get started here in just a minute or two, so we'll get started with the festivities in about a minute. Just wanted to let folks know that you're in the right place, and there's no anatomy class or anything like that going on up here. But we'll get started in about 1 minute and get the festivities kicked off. Thank you for being here.
It's just very much so fast. So what is it? That's all I wanted to do. I didn't have to put like a picture of each page, just like a sweet thing. Maybe we could get about the Swedish on it. It could be. That's a logo or something.
You make it more
Make sure you pray for it.
See you, Chelsea. Yeah, take care. How you doing?
All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started for real this time. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2015 Carl Blyth Lecture in Exercise and Sports Science. As always, this is an exciting day for our faculty and students as we highlight much of the impactful work that's being done in the different fields that represent our department. As well as giving the Blyth Lecture today, we'll also be recognizing our winner for the Hyatt Scholarship that we'll announce a little bit later on as we get going here. The lecture is given annually in memory of the late Dr. Carl Blyth, who served as a dedicated faculty member at the University of North Carolina for 36 years, from 1949 to 1985. During Dr. Blyth's tenure as department chair from 1970 to 1980, the department was truly transformed into one of the leading applied sciences programs in the country. Dr. Blyth's vision for integrating the study of traditional physical education and physical activity with principles of exercise physiology and injury prevention have really formed our way of thinking and doing research here throughout the Department of Exercise and Sports Science today. He was one of the leading scientists in the area of preventing catastrophic sport injuries, such as cervical spine injury, traumatic brain injury, and heat illness. And his research and subsequent recommendations have helped save lives on our playing fields across the world for the past 50 years. In 1965, Dr. Blyth, founded the National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research here at UNC, which has served as the epicenter for surveillance of catastrophic sport injuries and continues on today under the leadership of Dr. Kristen Kuchera. Carl and his colleagues were the impetus behind changes in the late 1970s that led to the no spearing rules in football, which dramatically reduced the incidence of catastrophic cervical spine and brain injuries in the sport. And some of Dr. Blyth's other accomplishments include being president of the American College of Sports Medicine, UNC's first inducted member to the American Academy of Kinesiology and Physical Education, founder of the National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research, founder of the Journal of Medicine, Science, and Sports and Exercise. He was a faculty representative on the President's Council of Physical Fitness, the American Football Coaches Association, the NCAA Competitive Safeguards Committee. He was the recipient of the American College of Sports Medicine Citation Award and was the original director of the Applied Physiology Lab here at UNC. Dr. Blyth retired in 1985, at which point we established this lecture in his honor. He passed away on January 18, 2000 at the age of 82. However, his legacy lives on here at UNC and in our department, and we are proud to continue his legacy with this annual lecture named in his honor. So, unfortunately, his wife Dorothy wasn't able to be with us today like she typically is. She sprained an ankle a couple days ago and hasn't been able to get around, but she promises that she'll be back here next year and looks forward to taking part in next year's event. Before beginning the Blyth Lecture, we will announce the recipient of the 2015 Ronald W. Hyatt Undergraduate Scholarship in Exercise and Sports Science. Named in honor of one of Carolina's priceless gems, this merit-based scholarship is awarded annually to an outstanding undergraduate student majoring in exercise and sports science. Dr. Ronald Hyatt was a professor in the Department of Exercise and Sports Science and served our university with great distinction for over 40 years. Dr. Hyatt initially became the intramural sport director and assistant professor of physical education in 1966, and immediately began touching the lives of thousands of Carolina students. His professional area of interest included professional preparation and teacher education, history of physical education and sport, the literature of sport, and the history of Olympics. His keen interest in and the historical knowledge of physical education and sport was substantial and was recognized by many. Doc Hyatt's awards were numerous and very prestigious. They include the C. Knox Massey Award for Distinguished Service from UNC, the EXSS Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching Award, and the Carolina Priceless Gem Award from the UNC Athletics Department. Dr. Hyatt was also the recipient of the highest civilian honor that could be granted in the state of North Carolina, the Order of the Longleaf Pine. The Ronald W. Hyatt Scholarship was created and made possible by donations from friends, colleagues, former students, and the family of Dr. Hyatt. And we are pleased to have several members of Dr. Hyatt's family with us here today. His wife, Gail, his children, as well as grandchildren. Please stand up, be recognized, and let's give them a round of applause for being here. Thank you very much. This year's recipient of the Ronald Hyatt Scholarship is Olivia DeCina. Olivia is a junior in exercise and sports science. She's an outstanding student and is actively engaged in many campus activities, which include several different leadership positions for programs and organizations across our campus that promote physical activity and wellness. In addition, she's enrolled in the Buckley Public Service Scholars Program and has been recognized with a Peer Leadership Award for outstanding efforts and service projects and for her demonstrated leadership. Olivia is also actively engaged in research as she is enrolled in the Carolina Research Scholars Program. She truly embodies the mission of our department, which is to discover, create, and promote knowledge of human movement to improve quality of life. Please join me in congratulating this year's recipient of the Hyatt Scholarship, Olivia DeCina. All right, and now as we get prepared for our Blyth Lecture, let me introduce our keynote speaker for the 2015 Carl Blyth Lecture, Dr. Brian Hainline. Dr. Hainline currently serves as the first Chief Medical Officer for the NCAA, where he oversees the NCAA Sports Science Institute. The Sports Science Institute is a collaborative effort with member institutions and centers of excellence across the United States focused on providing a national resource for safety, health, and medical expertise and research for medical and health professionals. Dr. Hainline is also a nationally recognized neurologist and serves as the Chief of Neurology and Integrative Pain Medicine at Pro Healthcare Associates in Lake Success, New York. He also holds an appointment as a clinical professor of neurology at New York University School of Medicine. Over his career, Dr. Hainline has been a leader in sports as he's published multiple scholarly works and served as the Chief Medical Officer for the U.S. Open Tennis Championships for 16 years, and then served as the Chief Medical Officer from 1992 to 2007, and was appointed the Chief Medical Officer of the USTA, the Tennis Association, in 2008. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Hainline to the University of North Carolina as our keynote speaker this year. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brian Hainline.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's really an honor to be here. When I look at so many things that Dr. Blyth did, in many ways, I'm following important parts of his path. With the American College of Sports Medicine, they're an integral part of everything that the NCAA is involved with. This is the National Center for Catastrophic Sport Injury Research. This is pivotal to how we're really gathering data for college, high school student athletes. The NCAA is a proud sponsor of this center, and we meet regularly with them. I read the Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise Journal every time it comes out. And just with regard to the Competitive Safeguards Committee, that's the essential committee that recommends all legislation for the NCAA. So there are a lot of connections that I feel with Dr. Blyth, even though I didn't know him. And in terms of exercise physiology and sport injury prevention, that should be the essence of what the NCAA is all about. And I hope that we are moving in that direction. We're imperfect, as every human being is, but I think we're really on the path to getting better, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. But before getting into the NCAA, I thought maybe I would just share some personal things with you, and I thought I would make this lecture a little bit personal, because it really is not just about the NCAA, it's about some things that I really deeply believe in. And so one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about is just the idea of being an athlete. How many here are student athletes or athletes that have competed in sport in one way or another? And so that's a very important part of my life. I grew up in a small part of Detroit. It wasn't a particularly beautiful place of Detroit. It was a bit sort of homogenous. I would call it racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Protestant, hardcore Catholic. That's what I was surrounded by when I grew up. But I was a good tennis player. And there were some parents who thought outside of the box. And there were a number of us who were decent tennis players, and we all would meet in the park and play all the time. And in the wintertime, we would meet on basketball courts and play on wooden courts, or we would hit against the wall. But that brought to me friends who were Black, Jews, Protestants, people that I normally wasn't supposed to befriend in that time and era. They became my closest friends. They became my colleagues as I ultimately got to explore not only the United States, but the world, playing sport. And so I feel like I have a lot to give back to the sport world, because that's what gave me so much of my life. A clinician, professionally, first and foremost, that's what I believe I am, more so than a policymaker. And I spoke to some of the people who were the athletic trainers today, and I just reminded them of something that I remind myself every day as a clinician, that whenever a patient comes to see you, that patient has a very important emotion, and that emotion is fear. And we need to, every time we're with a patient, just by our body language, by the way we make eye contact, maybe by a word we say, acknowledge and validate that fear is real, and that we're there to do everything we can for that patient. And it requires something that we call trust. That patient can walk away and know that you are someone that he or she can trust unconditionally. Without that, everything else breaks down. I love to teach. One of the contract clauses of working now full-time with the NCAA is that I could continue to do clinical medicine, which I do at Indiana University, and I teach neurology residents. And I try to teach them just what I spoke to you about being a clinician, about being there for patients. And actually, I think what I'm most proud of is the 20 years that I did teaching Sunday school, where I grew up in New York, or where I raised my family in New York. And that wasn't about necessarily religion or doctrine or anything like that. It was about working with 7th and 8th graders who are questioning the meaning of life. We no longer think of God as some sort of a Santa Claus or a guy with a puppet strings in his hand, and are wondering, well, what really is life all about? And in those 20 years, I never shared once my inner belief with them. I simply asked questions. Because what we're all called to do is to search, to ask questions, because we have to all decide what the meaning of life is for us. And that, I think, is our calling, all of us, as teachers. I love to write, but sometimes when we write, it's because we have to try to change the world. So I've written several books, but the book that's the most meaningful to me, it's a book called Neurological Complications of Pregnancy. So that came because my wife almost died. And then there were several areas of medicine where basically some serious mistakes were made. And we had to make some choices that were very painful, that saved her life. But then you come to a place and say, well, how can I help change the world? How can I make the world a better place, like Dr. Blyth did? And that came through writing. That came through trying to educate people so that the same mistakes wouldn't be made. And you hope that when you write, that people that read what you write come to a place of trusting that as well. I've done research, and I shared today with many people that my research actually was in neuro-oncology. And one of the great things about being in medicine is that that's what started my career, doing brain tumor research. And now here I am as Chief Medical Officer of the NCAA. There are so many opportunities for everyone in this room. And you never know when an opportunity is going to come. And it doesn't mean that you have to have studied for that. It means you just have to be prepared to trust life circumstances and to trust yourself. And finally, now I'm in the role as a sports scientist and public health advocate. And what I wanted to do is to talk about that within my role at the NCAA and to share with you where I think the NCAA is moving, or maybe where it could be moving. And the first thing I wanted to share is our mission statement. This was created on the second day of my job. And every single day, I ask myself if we're really living up to that mission statement. And so you see that in the first clause, to promote and develop safety, excellence, and wellness in college student athletes. All of us need to understand, especially as exercise physiologists, that performance and safety and wellness are always interconnected. You don't sacrifice wellness or safety to excel. And we have data to prove that. We know that. But we need everyone to know that. And we need the coaches to trust that that is true. The coaches need to trust that that is true. That when you are excelling, that your safety and wellness is going to take you to a place of excellence, and none of them can be compromised. The second part of that is to foster lifelong physical and mental development. On this planet of ours, this great planet of ours, every single thing we experience is physical. Everything is physical. The soul is physical. What do I mean by that? It means that we can talk about the great metaphysical realities, We can talk about spirituality, but what we experience always comes through a physicality place. It's something that happens in the brain. And that doesn't take away from anything that might be called spiritual, but we have to understand mental and physical are one and the same. In fact, there's so much one and the same that our brain works in a way to trick us that we might think it's different. So let's imagine right now that someone just came through this door, blasted through the door, and had a gun. In 3/1000ths of a second, 3/1000ths of a second, every single person in this room would have dilated pupils, the heart would be contracting forcefully, muscles would be hypercontracted, and you would be hypervigilant in 3/1000ths of a second. Only after that would you be consciously aware of the fact that you were afraid. It wouldn't be that someone comes to this room and you say, he looks angry, has a gun, I think I'm going to be afraid. So our experiences, our mental and emotional experiences are physiological very often before we're conscious of it. That is a primary principle of exercise physiology, because that often determines how we heal an injury. And we don't understand that. We sometimes look too much at the end organ, the muscle, and we aren't looking at really what's happening in the body's physiology. Our vision, this is an important statement. Of course, we want to be the biggest, the boldest, the best. But what's important in that vision statement is that the NCAA believes that it has to be linked to youth sport. Kids come to college broken. They've had Tommy John surgery. They have ACL repairs. They've been burnt out. They've already been depressed. That's not right. And so we've made it very clear that as we're going to really succeed as an organization, we must work hand in hand with youth sport. In fact, we have an ethical obligation to do so. In fact, the youth sport organizations are trusting that we're going to do so. Well, I wanted to take you through some highlight items that the NCAA is working on. And one is concussion. So I've often been asked, so Dr. Hainline, is concussion, is that the most important health issue that you're facing? And I say, no, it's not. It's the elephant in the room. But I think mental health and overuse injuries are more important than concussion. They are destroying more lives than concussion. But we have to address concussion. But what's the problem with concussion? There's over 43 working definitions of concussion. They aren't neurologically based. They treat the brain as if it's jello in a skull. And for too long, the medical and scientific organizations were not taking enough attention and really addressing concussion. And it really wasn't until 2009 that the world started opening its eyes, despite the fact that right here at UNC Chapel Hill, there was exceptional work being done in concussion. This is the 43rd working definition. Now you tell me, if you were a clinician and someone gave you that definition, would you know what's wrong with the person? If I were running down because I wanted to get out of here right away, because I was afraid of that guy with the gun, and I hit my head because I tripped, and if 3 other people were running and hit their heads and tripped, we could all be given that definition. But every single one of us would have a different manifestation, guaranteed. One person would be dizzy, one would be acting goofy, one would be seeing double, one would be forgetful, because concussion depends on where in the brain the injury is. And we're not talking about that, especially neurologists, and I'm a neurologist. One of the other hats I wear is I oversee the strategic planning for sports neurology for the American Academy of Neurology. This is the first year in the history of neurological training, after 6 years of nonstop petitioning, that neurology residents are going to be formally trained in concussion. Imagine that when you have agitators saying we should have a neurologist on every sideline whenever there's a football game. Well, you know what? I don't want a neurologist when my kid's playing football. I don't want some guy with a bow tie who doesn't know anything about sports trying to do a concussion exam when he's not been trained or she's not been trained in concussion. So we have a long way to go. Talking about concussion, everyone talks about it as if it's just a TV, big Power 5 issue in men football players. Well, guess what? It's equal across all three divisions. Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, they all have the same concussion rate. But this is even more shocking. Now, not everyone agrees with this data, and I don't necessarily agree with it because I can show you 10 slides that show 10 different data points. But this is from some pretty reliable study. What's the highest concussion risk sport? Men's wrestling, followed by women's field hockey. And then football is right up there with other women's sports. Women's lacrosse, women's basketball, women's soccer. Why isn't anyone talking about women concussions? It kind of reminds me of 30 years ago when the common practice was if a man went to the emergency room with chest pain, he was worked up for a heart attack. And if a woman went to the emergency room with chest pain, she was worked up for an anxiety disorder. When I was in medical school, before they really defined migraine pathophysiology, I had a teacher tell me that migraine was a convenient excuse for women. An excuse for what? I wondered. I didn't know. But I didn't trust the information being given to me. And that's a serious breakdown. Because we now know there is a neurobiological basis for migraine. And we now know that estradiol primes that. So we have a good explanation. But this tells us something very different. And what we do know is that women concuss differently than men, both biomechanically and neurologically. Their brains are different, their biomechanics are different. They don't concuss better or worse, they concuss differently. We have to address that. Well, what the NCAA did is we reached out to the Department of Defense. It might seem like an unlikely relationship, but we wanted to solve the problem of concussion. And what we know is that in the Department of Defense, the vast majority of traumatic brain injuries are actually concussion. They're mild traumatic brain injuries. And the majority of those happen in a way that's almost identical to a sport concussion. But there's no control in the military theater. We have great control or the possibility for it in a sport field. So we have numerous meetings. This is a timeline, but for those of you who do research, between the time that in April 2014, where we accepted who was going to run this study, and then getting the study launched in August 2014, getting grants received, getting protocols written up, getting institutional review boards accepted, that is lightning speed. I don't know that that's ever happened before. And that's because of some exceptional leaders in the NCAA. But you know how all this really started? I went through, I can't tell you how many meetings just trying to figure out how can we solve this concussion riddle. I met with experts from all over the country. And one time I was at a meeting, Kevin Guskowitz was there, and my leg was shaking furiously. You know when you get nervous and you can't stop your leg from shaking, either you've had too much coffee or you're sleep deprived or you're nervous. So it probably was all three for me. But Kevin pulled me out of the room. He knew I was a little wigged out. And he said, Brian, I know you have a very difficult decision to make. Because I had scholars who were saying, Brian, we can run this study for you. I had powerhouses saying that. And Kevin took me aside and he said, just choose the people you know you can trust. Choose the people you know you can trust. And at that moment, my legs stopped shaking, and I knew from all of the recommendations that I had, all the information I had, I knew in my heart of hearts who I was going to choose. We made that choice, and it was an exceptional choice. It was based on trust. And this is how it all comes together. This is our study. And I'm not going to take you through all of it, but I wanted to also show from a societal point of view, a trust thing put in this study. At the top level, you see three people, Colonel Dallas Hack from the Department of Defense, myself from the NCAA, Walter Cordyceps who's the interim director of the NINDS at the National Institutes of Health. We're overseeing the study. We don't have voting power. This study is being run by a core operating group. This is not a big pharma study. It's not a big tobacco study. Anyone can see that this is a transparent study. It's being run by solid investigators. But what's really cool is if you follow the yellow here and you see UNC Chapel Hill. UNC Chapel Hill is one of 4 schools that is carrying out some of the most advanced concussion research clinically that's ever been done in the history of concussion. This is what's happening at this great school of yours. That every single student athlete is going through an exceptionally rigorous clinical concussion protocol at baseline. And then after he or she is concussed, if they're concussed. And in addition, they're getting genetic testing, blood biomarkers, wearing head sensors, getting brain MRIs. This is a protocol which is so labor and energy intensive. It requires a commitment from the president, from the athletic director, from researchers, from clinicians, from coaches. This is happening here. This is something you should all be very proud of. And it's just a very, very busy time because it's not only baseline testing, but within 6 hours of an injury, they're getting blood tests again, they're getting all of the clinical measures done, they're getting an MRI done within 2 days. So this is really a rigorous protocol. We will know more in 2 years about concussion than we've ever known before. And it's going to change policy, it's going to change the way that we do things. And briefly, I wanted to tell you that while we're waiting for this study to come in, we're also looking at how we can change the culture of concussion. If I say, don't drink and drive, most people are going to say, okay, but they're going to make a decision on their own. How do you change behavior when you know something is not right? How do you change the behavior so that coaches, parents, athletes, administrators, that everyone will do the right thing for concussion? Well, we don't know. So we sent this out as a challenge to all 1,100 schools to give us the best possible information. And we're going to have within 1 year and then again within 4 years, some very solid research-based ways that we can prove methodologically that doing certain paradigms that the whole culture of concussion is going to change. It has to, for the good of sport. It has to so that an athlete, when he or she is concussed, can trust that he can go to a coach or she can go to a coach and say, something happened to me, I need to be evaluated. Or the coach can trust that he has to let go or she has to let go. It's really the physician and athletic trainer that need to make the right decision. That has to happen, but it's not always happening right now. While we're waiting for everything, we've developed a series of guidelines. And I'm not going to take you through all of them, but I wanted to show you something that's very important. When we developed guidelines for concussion and independent medical care, we got 11 of the most prominent medical organizations in the country to endorse what we're doing. Because I have a feeling that if I had just said this is the right thing to do, or maybe a small group, that maybe the information wouldn't be accepted. So what's happening in this country, for those of you who haven't palpated it, there's something terribly exciting going on. That medical organizations, youth sport organizations, the NCAA, I think professional sport organizations, they're all getting together and saying, you know what? How can we make sport better? How can we shift what's happening in our society? I don't think that was happening 10 years ago. And I really believe in my heart that 10 years ago, if this position had been created, that whoever would have had that position would have been shouting in the wilderness and people wouldn't have been listening. Something's happening. And for all of you involved in research and in sports medicine and exercise physiology, you should know that the world is a different place because there's this magic window right now where everyone is trying to do the right thing. I really see that and I sense it. And you're in a great place to experience that. Well, one of the things we need to do when we're talking about sport and athletics is to address mental health issues. When I met with student athletes from around the country, and when I met with the student athlete leadership, they said, Dr. Hainline, yeah, concussion's important, but someone has to address mental health. Mental health is a huge issue. And in the ages of college, your brain is still undergoing radical changes, what we call myelination and synaptic pruning. And the incidence of depression and anxiety starts skyrocketing. So we actually put together this book, and for those of you who don't have it, it's free online if you go to the NCAA Sports Science Institute website, and it's downloadable on all sorts of smart applications or PDF or so forth. But we had a meeting with a group of coaches and sports scientists and university presidents, and we met for 3 days. And during that meeting, every single person in the room at one point in time broke down. Why? Because when you really get into some of the mental health issues, you understand that some of them are really serious. There were coaches who said, yeah, I know my athletes are suffering. Who's taking care of me? There were psychologists who said, we've been crying about this for 20 years. I can't believe someone's finally addressing it. There were athletes who said, I had an injury and my whole life changed. My career ended. I was nothing. I was nothing. So these are real issues, and so we did tackle this. I believe this book is the most comprehensive book ever done on student-athlete mental health, but it's just the beginning. But you know what? The picture isn't so gloomy, necessarily, because if you're an athlete compared to a non-athlete, relatively speaking, you're actually somewhat protected from depression. That's what these statistics tell us. They're not rip-roaring, statistically significant changes, but yeah, there's somewhat of a protective effect. I know that when I work out regularly and play tennis regularly, I'm much less psychotic than when I don't. And my friends tell me the same. But we also know that when you work out regularly, when you're an athlete, you learn how to push yourself, you learn how to fall down, you learn how to pick yourself back up. You learn how to win, you learn how to lose, you learn how to be goal-oriented. That is all good for your mental health. More importantly, it actually develops your brain in a very important way. And we're also protected against anxiety. So it's not all gloomy mental health issues, but some of them are. Look at what we're doing to our student athletes. Is this right, do you think, that student athletes are spending about 80 hours a week in a combination of exercise, training for sport, and academics? That's a long work week. And that's something that I have pledged to do everything in my power to change, because it's not right. Sport is important, but it can't be God. It can't be worshipped. And then there are some tough issues we have to consider. Sexual abuse. Look at the amount of sexual abuse, even if you're a female athlete or non-athlete, it's exceptionally high. But as clinicians, we're often silent about that. We don't address it, even though we know the health impacts that that can have. And we know those that are at high risk. The highest risk, the African-American male who's homosexual or bisexual has about a 5-fold increased risk. The female who is homosexual or bisexual has a marked increased risk. Why, we don't know, but these are facts. Facts that we must deal with, facts that every athletics department has to deal with, facts that a student athlete who has suffered, or anyone who has suffered that, can trust that he or she can bring that forward and can be managed properly. Well, this is something I'm going to take you through some slides on sleep. Has anyone here in the room ever been sleep deprived before? Well, let me take you through some things. So this is a performance scale. So the higher you are on the scale, the more poorly you're doing. This is neuromuscular performance in some areas of attention. So what happens if you're sleep deprived? This is being progressively sleep deprived to 4 hours a day. And over a period of days, you get progressively worse in neuromuscular performance. And it doesn't level off. It's cumulative. You keep getting worse, even though the person who is sleep deprived, so you know when you're sleep deprived the first day, you're kind of cranky, people don't want to be around you, you're forgetting names, and you don't do very well on the exam you pulled an all-nighter for because you just, you keep getting these blanks and you're fuzzy in the head. You say, man, I'm just not feeling great. But you get sleep deprived over a few days and you think, oh, everything's leveled off, I'm cool. But everyone around you still knows that you're just not right. And if we tested you in a lab, if we tested you in an exercise physiology lab, we would know that your performance would be deteriorating. Yet, we're not addressing this. Kids at the college level and at the high school level are sleep deprived. And in fact, if you progressively sleep deprive someone, you develop a series of symptoms that are indistinguishable from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And you know what the treatment for that in our society is, where we have a 5-minute doctor visit and a McDonald's quick fix lunch? Stimulants. Can you imagine that? These are facts. We have to arm ourselves with these facts, and we have to do everything in our power to make certain that we aren't having student athletes sleep deprived, or exercise physiology students sleep deprived, because you don't perform as well. This is what we're putting out, this is what we're trying to change. But this is a societal issue too, it's not just an NCAA issue. So I wanted to shift gears and talk about drugs a little bit. So I asked if anyone here was ever sleep deprived. Has anyone here ever done drugs? No, I'm just kidding. Don't have to answer that. But drugs are an issue. They're a systemic issue. But I just wanted to take you through some facts, because if we're going to make decisions at the NCAA level, they have to be driven by facts. So this is alcohol use, so it's kind of leveled off a little bit, but still a good 80% of all student athletes drink alcohol. That's sort of a cultural thing. But this is what shocks me, and this is how I lose sleep at night. Look at males in Division 1, 2, or 3. Between 15 and 20% of male student athletes are drinking more than 10 drinks at a sitting. And for females, it's about 3%. 3% of 460,000 student athletes. Do you know what happens to you after you drink 10 drinks? It's not pretty. And it's one of the leading causes of death among student athletes. And it's one of the leading causes of sexual assault. A cause, not just a correlation. We know that. We know that. What do we do about that? Marijuana use is pretty much leveled off. About 20% of D1 and 2 students smoke pot, 30% of D3 students sitting under the tree smoke pot. This is a little shocking. Prescription ADHD use, stimulants. This is really going up considerably, but these kids aren't all on all prescription Ritalin or Adderall. They're taking it for other reasons. And more shockingly, they're taking pain medicine. 18% of college student athletes taking Vicodin or Percocet or OxyContin. Do you know how narcotics work? Psychophysiologically? We have opiate receptors in our brain. We have opiate receptors on our white blood cell. Your body makes endogenous opium. You've heard of a runner's high, or if you have an exceptional experience, your body is filled with these endogenous opioids or opium. It actually will bind to the white blood cell receptor and you'll fight infection more efficiently. That's called mind-body. That makes you feel better. But if you take exogenous opium, morphine, heroin, Percocet, OxyContin, Vicodin, they're all the same. They make you not care about pain at any level of your being. Spiritual pain, mental pain, physical pain, emotional pain. All I know is that 18% of college student athletes are taking these drugs. Something's not right. And then there's the use of performance-enhancing drugs called doping, like anabolic steroids. Does anyone know what anabolic steroids are? Testosterone? You've heard of that maybe in doping in sport? You heard of the whole Lance Armstrong thing and others? Well, the way they work is they make you a little stronger, but the way they really work is they help you to recover very quickly. So we have to do something about drugs in sport. And so what the NCAA has just proposed, and I hope it's going to pass, is that at every single college campus, we are doing an exceptional program in looking at alcohol, prescription opiates, and marijuana that doesn't involve just simply testing for drugs, but that involves understanding why a human being might be taking these drugs. And for doping, we're going to work very much in alignment with our conferences like the ACC and have everyone on the same page, because cheating shouldn't be allowed. And I just wanted to end with two things. So I'm giving you sort of highlight items of what we're addressing. This has been one of the most difficult issues that I've faced, and that's sudden cardiac death. Has anyone ever seen films of an athlete who died? Hank Gathers or anyone like that? So sudden cardiac arrest means that, boom, you're just on the floor because your heart has gone into an irregular heartbeat, ventricular fibrillation. And if you're a female college student athlete, your risk of dying of sudden cardiac death is about 1 in 120,000. And then you can keep stratifying that to the point that you get to, if you're a male, African-American basketball player, your risk of dying of sudden cardiac death is 1 in 5,000. We have about 5 student athletes every year die of sudden cardiac death. This is where the great relationship with the National Center for Catastrophic Sports Injury Research here at Chapel Hill, UNC, is so important and vital to us. But we have to do a better job. You know that still today at high schools and even at some colleges, people just show up with a little prescription pad saying, I'm cleared to participate. So we have a task force, and we're going to make recommendations that are going to be far-reaching and that really are going to change the whole pre-participation physical, and ultimately lay a pathway for electrocardiograms and how to manage this properly. One of the ways of management, does anyone here know CPR? Anyone here been trained in CPR? Almost everyone. AED? So that's universal, right? It must be universal. There should be an AED here in place so that any high-risk area, football field, soccer field, lacrosse field, gym, weight room, that if someone goes down, that they can have an AED on them within 3 minutes or less, because every minute that you delay, it delays recovery to life by about 10%. So this is an issue that we're looking at. And then finally, one that's near and dear to my heart is overuse injury and sports specialization, and how we're looking at it at the NCAA. This is, I think, might be our most important relationship building, is we're going to work with every national governing body of sport to look at the model of sport from youth to college and beyond. Does anyone know what early specialization is? Hands? Every exercise physiologist must know early specialization. What that means is that before puberty, you are playing in one sport year-round, uniquely one sport. That is the wrong thing to do. You don't develop properly. You don't develop athleticism. One of the greatest examples of that is Little League World Series. Has anyone ever watched that? You know, the 12-year-olds with the beards pitching those fastballs. $30 million a year enterprise. Well, over the last 30 years, guess how many people who have pitched in Little League World Series have actually pitched as a starting pitcher in Major League Baseball? That's early specialization. You peak early, you develop as a player, you don't develop as an athlete. We're going to look at every single sport. We started with soccer, our next one is wrestling. We're going to go down the line and work with youth sport, because we need to help educate parents. We need parents to trust that we're giving them information that's best for their kids. There's no trust out there right now. at the organizational level. Everyone's just trying to do the max because they think the max is the best thing to do, whereas the best thing to do is to play a few sports, multiple sports, and to take time off and to rest. So it was a really exciting summit, and I hope it's going to take us far. And to me, it's probably the most important bridge builder we have with society. And ultimately, that I think is the NCAA's calling and role. We have to be a bridge builder to lead the way. I'm not sure right now if you took a poll of everyone in the United States and said, can the NCAA be trusted as the national governing body of collegiate interathletics to lead the way for sport development and youth sport development? I don't know that everyone would say yes. I'm not even sure the majority of people would say yes. But I believe it's our ethical responsibility to lead the way. And the only way we can do it is by working with clinicians, by working with our researchers, by working with our public policy developers, by working with coaches, athletic directors, presidents. Everyone has to be on the same page. And why do we have to be on that same page? Well, when we come right down to it, just like when as a physician I'm with a patient, and I use this word very carefully, to me in that room, that patient is the most sacred thing on this planet. It's sacred. Doesn't mean religious. But when we hold something as sacred, it means that it is so special on this great planet of ours that we will do everything to protect that sacredness. In sport, the athlete is our sacred asset. And if everything around sport is not built around that, to protect that sacredness, then we have done something wrong. Also, we must always remember that sport can or should be a model of wellness for life. If it's not, we're doing something wrong. If football in this country is not a model of wellness for life, we're doing something wrong. And I believe it can be. Look at the rules of football. The rules of NCAA football start off by saying, football is an aggressive, rugged contact sport. Fair enough, so is wrestling. So are a lot of contact sports. The second sentence of the rules of football says there's no place in the sport of football to deliberately inflict harm on your opponent. And the third sentence is there's no place for a coach to allow that. So we can have football be an aggressive, rugged contact sport, and we can have rules that live by that spirit, and we can have everyone be on the same page, and in that way, football would be a model of wellness for life. But what happened in the last 20 years? Excuse me. The helmet started to be used as a weapon, in tackling especially. It was the surest way to get a fumble. You can cuss someone severely enough that they'll drop the ball. But that's not what football should be, and that is changing. The rules have changed, and we see the difference. Compare the rules of football to the rules of boxing. You know what boxing says? The goal is to cause brain damage in your opponent, right? A knockout is that you can cuss someone so severely that the person doesn't have the neuromuscular control to stand up. A technical knockout is even scarier. You're so concussed you can no longer protect yourself. That's when you need someone who's going to stop the fight. I was a ringside physician for many years, and I was considered a weak stomach because I always threw in the white towel. I couldn't take it. But if we're going to have a sport, it should be a model of wellness for life, and we should trust that it is. And finally, I really believe sport can save society. That's not my statement, that's Nelson Mandela's. Sport is so wonderful, it's so exceptional, that it should be a vital part of who we are in society. It's a vital part of what it means to be a human being, to be an excellent human being. You all are part of that. And that's what we need to remember, is that we're all in this together. Every one of us in this room. And if we just remember those basic principles, the basic principles of sacredness, why we need to do what we do, I'm hoping the NCAA will remember what it needs to do. And then it becomes a pretty cool journey. It's a journey of trust together. And it's a journey that has been exceptional for me, but mostly importantly, it's been exceptional because I get to be in a room like this with such incredible young people. And I've met the most extraordinary individuals at UNC the last 2 days. You are in a place that is really cool and special. Don't forget that. Rejoice in it. And thanks for having me here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hainline, for that great, really thought-provoking presentation. That concludes our 2015 Blyth Lecture. I'd like to thank everyone for being in attendance here today. It's great to see so many faculty and students here for the presentation. Also, I'd like to just real quickly thank those folks behind the scenes who helped hold everything together. Victor Anderson, Jennifer Canders, and most importantly, Deb Murray over here, who really kind of put everything together behind the scenes and made sure everything ran smoothly today. So thank you, all three of you, for doing everything for the department, for the Blyth Lecture. Again, it was great seeing you here today. Everyone have a great afternoon, and thanks for coming.